Welcome to Codecraft, Under the Hood with Blizzard Engineering, Part 2.
Good morning, BlizzCon. Welcome to day number 2. I hope you had a good time yesterday. It's been a great show so far. So today, we actually managed to find 5 of our engineers. They're still awake. Maybe they just got up, don't know. Anyway, so we're going to go through some introductions, then I have a few questions for them, and then we will get to your questions. So to kick things off, I am Derek Dupra. I'm the engineering manager on Hearthstone. And
I'm Nick Rivera. I'm a senior software engineer on the online group on the Diablo team, and I've been at Blizzard for 9 years.
I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm one of the lead engineers on BattleNet. I've been at Blizzard for about 3.5 years.
Good morning, BlizzCon. My name is Sale Yoon. I'm the server engineering lead on the Hearthstone team, and I've been with Blizzard and Hearthstone for about 3.5 years.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Newsom. I'm a mobile software engineer in the web and mobile group. I have been at Blizzard for just over a year, and I'm a part of the team that just released the BattleNet mobile app.
Good morning. My name is Andy Tran, and I'm a senior software engineer at Blizzard for web and mobile, and I've been here about 9.5 years. Worked on a lot of web projects, including the forums, our news systems, the WoW Armory, and StarCraft 2 profiles.
Awesome, thanks. So let's get things started with a couple initial questions here. So Nick, what was one of your biggest blunders, and what did you learn from it?
OK. Well, the key part of this story is that I'm still here, not fired yet. So this was around the time that, excuse me, that Necromancer was about to come out. We were really excited about it, not just because Necromancer was turning out to be a really cool class, but for us on the online group, excuse me again, it meant it was important because we were going to release it worldwide on the in-game store. At that point, the in-game store was only ever available in China because the game is free to play over there. The in-game store is a cool system because it's completely data-driven, which means you just add something to the catalog in a data file somewhere, and it just appears. And that mostly works without having to touch the game or the servers. I say mostly because this was the exception. For a server in the game to know about the Necromancer, they have to know what a Necromancer is. So as soon as we added it to the store catalog, this meant that all of our currently live servers threw up a little warning in our monitoring software saying, I don't know what this is. It's important to note it's just a warning. We expected this warning to come about. Nothing bad was happening. But we don't like having extraneous warnings in our monitoring software because it creates noise that makes it hard to track real problems. So we evaluated, I took a look at what it would take to get rid of that warning and came up with what I thought was a very simple solution, which is, well, we'll just patch the currently live servers so that they know what a Necromancer is and don't complain about it. They won't send it down, but they won't send it down to the game, but it'll call the warning and we'll get on with our day. It was like a 2-line fix, so I basically fast-tracked it to live deployment, and I was like, what's the harm? So a couple hours later, after checking that in, I got a call because apparently after it had been rolled out to China, many players were reporting that they could no longer make any purchases. And I was in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, this couldn't be that little fix. It was only 2 lines. And we worked to track it down, and guess what? It was that trivial 2-line fix. So I had egg on my face, for sure. But we worked through. We basically just reverted it because it was simple to do that, and everything went back to normal just fine. Albeit I was a bit more embarrassed. So I learned 2 things that day, which was always test everything, no matter how small it is. But more importantly, it's OK to make a mistake every once in a while, even if it seems like it's the end of the world. There's a solution to every problem. So if you make that mistake, you just have to own up to it and solve the problem as quickly as possible, and you'll be able to get through it.
Thank you, Nick, for sharing that story, and I'm glad you're still with us.
Me too.
So Andrew, For engineers who are not on the game dev teams, can you tell us what some of the challenges are for the games that are releasing new patches, new releases, new expansions? Yep.
So I work on the Battle.net purchase team. So if you've ever bought something in-game, if you've been on a web shop, if you've put a key and used a key in a box or anything like that, you've gone through our platform. And purchasing is one of the things that no one thinks about. In fact, when it works, no one even really realizes we're there. But we sometimes get some really interesting engineering challenges with the fact that we support every single game. We built a really highly scalable system. You know, it's distributed. You can log in anywhere in the world and play with the stuff that are in game. But sometimes we get challenges like Heroes 2.0, where they say, hey, we want to give players a bunch of loot chests on day one. We go, OK, well, how many is a bunch? Somewhere between 12 and 70. Wow, OK, so that's a lot. When do they get it? Right as soon as they log in. OK. You know, we do the math and we look at it and we realize our system's going to be hit 100 times harder than it's ever been hit. So we then have to go and start doing load testing. We have to come up with faster ways of writing things to the database. We have to sometimes come up with new ways of communicating with the game. And then there's CS teams that have to figure out how do you make sure that players get their stuff, and if something goes wrong, how do we correct it, and all those other things. So there's a ton of other things that are on Blizzard outside of just the engineering for games that every patch, new things have to be figured out and made sure that it's solid. So that way, you guys don't even have to realize those teams are there.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And I know there's a lot of work that goes under the hood, so we really appreciate that. So, Sale, we're on the same team. I'm very curious. What was the first memorable thing that you ever worked on Hearthstone?
So let's see. I started on the Hearthstone team about a month and a half after launch, which, if you'll recall, was in March of 2014. So when I first started on the team, I kind of did what you normally do when you first start on a team. I was fixing bugs, and at the time, we were getting ready for releasing the Curse of Naxxramas adventure. So I was just kind of doing bug fixes there. But the first really memorable thing I worked on was for our first expansion called Goblins vs. Gnomes. And in that set, if you'll recall, there's a card called Steam Weedle Sniper. And Steam Weedle Sniper was really interesting because it did something that you previously couldn't do in our game before, which was change the way targeting works for the hero power. And our targeting system was probably a little more complicated than it needed to be at the time. So it was really interesting because I was digging into this new system that I had never previously worked with before. And engineers like solving problems. And so it's kind of interesting to dig into that stuff, see how it really works. And the other really interesting thing about it was I came from a more technology-focused industry. And so it was the first time I got to work with a technical artist. So that's a shout out to Becca Abel, if you're out there. So that was really cool. I'd never worked with an artist before. And it's really interesting because there's a certain visceral feel-good moment that you get sometimes when you're working on gameplay systems because you write this code and you work with an artist, but then to actually see your code come alive on the screen when you play Steam Weedle Sniper, and all of a sudden the hero icon changes, and you can actually start targeting things. It was really cool, and it was kind of a really cool feel-good moment. So yeah, that's the first really memorable thing I worked on for Hearthstone.
Thank you, Sale. So Ryan, you've been working on the Battle.net app. I hope everyone here has been downloading it, using it. It's awesome. I really appreciate it. Could you share with us what some of the challenges were for working on that app?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we started the Battle.net mobile app, we knew that we wanted to try and make iPhone and Android users equally happy, which is a challenge in itself. One of the things we needed to do this is to make a user interface for each of the individual apps that respects the given platform. What I mean by that is if you're an iPhone user, you're using the iPhone application, everything that you're going to see in the app and experience is going to be familiar to you. And the same would be true for an Android user in the Android application. To accomplish this, we had the engineers and the designers work very closely together so that the designers could leverage the experience and the expertise of the engineers for their familiar platform and analyze every UI component that we put in the application to make sure that it was appropriate for the platform while trying to keep everything as consistent as possible. An example of this divergence is actually the tabs on the main screen. If you look at the Android and iOS application, they're in completely opposite positions, and even access to the profile is in a different way for both Android and iOS. And when we actually started making the app and engineering things out, it was another challenge, which is actually one of the hardest things that I feel like I have to do as an engineer, and that's to throw away something that I've worked hard on. A lot of times when we made a component and we actually physically use it or like have users test it, we determine that things are wrong. Either that or the design changes, specs change, more requirements are made in there. Sometimes we can just get away with making some significant changes to what already exists, but a lot of times we actually have to make a hard decision, and that's to throw away what we already have and start from scratch. This just produces better code, a better component, and in the end, a much more Blizzard quality application. And it's something that's a much better user experience for our players.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate it. All right, so before I ask my last question here, we're going to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. We just ask that you queue up over there to your right. There's a nice light over there. And there'll be someone there to help you organize your questions. So, Andy, there's a lot of great esports events going on. And I know you've been working on the esports platform. Could you tell us what some of the goals were for the platform and what sort of challenges and how did you help the team, you and your team, achieve those goals?
Yeah, Blizzard's always played a big role in esports, so we wanted to provide and build a web and mobile experience for all of our fans to follow all of the esports games. What that specifically meant for my team in particular is we wanted to build a shared platform of tools and services to do really common things like bracket logic, player team management, caching, and just other general good, consistent API features so that all the various esports programs like the Heroes Global Championship and Overwatch World Cup can focus on doing their own website integration to tell their own unique esports experiences. So right from the get-go, my team decided we really wanted to focus on having good documentation that's accurate and up-to-date and had samples for everything, which is a lot easier said than done. Our experience with documentation has taught us it's really easy to be rushing out a feature and forget documenting one new field you added or just forgetting to document the entire feature at all. And on top of that, it's really easy to forget updating all the samples you've added to your documentation like months ago. So the way we combat this feature was we actually added a step into our automated testing that actually will record the requests and responses so that we can then use them as samples in our documentation. And that pretty much ensures that our samples in our documentation is always up to date. And on top of that, our tests will actually detect if there are missing fields that were introduced that don't have corresponding documentation, and will actually fail a test. So it actually forces the developer to actually document everything. So as a result, our platform pretty much has 100% documentation coverage. And it's been instrumental in rolling out all the various esports web experiences out there all the way to production for us.
All right, thank you, Andy. All right, so for the part that we've been waiting for, your questions.
Hey, my name is Jim. This question's sort of multi-part. What was the first Blizzard game you played? What key events led you to working at Blizzard? Did you win or lose that first game that was a head-to-head, and who did you play against?
Okay, I'll take this one. Hi, Jim. So first Blizzard game I played was Warcraft 2. First time I played it was against my dad. It was pretty cool. I got absolutely destroyed by it. But the thing that I really, thought was interesting was like this is something completely different. You know, it was fun and just got me super excited about playing games and like wanting to build them and like just building small projects. And I ended up going down more the web tech side, but you know, that passion for being involved in this community and this this Blizzard, you know, was something I always wanted to do.
I also had an interesting experience. My first game I played that was Blizzard was Warcraft 2 as well. It was just the first RTS game for me, and it just blew my mind that you could actually control an army and build and stuff like that. And then my experience getting into Blizzard was also really interesting. The way I got in was I was pretty much competing with another Warlock on our server to 60 once the game launched. And he didn't work at the time, so he beat me to it. I was like number 2. So I like to think that I was number 1 because I actually had work. But we ended up being really good friends, and he actually had a cousin that worked at Blizzard, and he just sent over my resume, and then the rest is history.
Oh, thank you. So we have somebody who apparently has been here a few times.
A few times. Question is about version control and changelog documentation, something I've worked on a number of years programming-wise, and I'm just curious the scale and exactly what it takes to version control and keep all of that documentation for Blizzard as a company. Is it individual per team? Is it a centralized system? I'm just kind of curious how you guys handle it at your scale.
Yeah, I can answer that as well. I think it's unique per team. But one of the key things is once you have APIs out there, it's really important to preserve backwards compatibilities. You never want to make anyone break. So it's really difficult to migrate off of backwards compatibility stuff, but you always want to just make sure that it works for your existing clients and just increase communication to help them migrate off of it.
One other thing is with version control, more and more, some of our teams are starting to really use centralized version control. Like, we can see, like web and mobile projects and Battle.net projects were more or less in the same area. As far as like making sure that change control and stuff like that works, every commit you end up doing, why did you work on this? What's the story? It was. We have software that then goes and can correlate those stories with the code review. And when we actually go to do a release, this is what's in the release, so we can actually start checking. And more we're trying to get to the point where we can identify this change went out. And if there's a problem, how do we deal with just this change? We want to avoid getting more and more surprises. And we aren't there everywhere yet, but we're trying to continuously improve that.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think it's been touched upon, but it's different from, typically each game team has their own solution for this problem because the only people working on the game are the people on the game team, but it's sort of a different challenge for people on central platform teams such as Battle.net or Web who have to share their code across the entire company for multiple usages. So there's sort of different considerations to be taken there. Which is why they tend to use different solutions.
All right, thanks, guys. Our next question.
Hi, I was just wondering if Blizzard's doing anything in particular to address the notion of women and diversity in the industry?
I can take that. So first of all, I mean, one of the really exciting things about opening ceremony yesterday was part of the opening ceremony's video. There was a section, if you guys saw it, where we were talking to people with a white backdrop. And I mean, it wasn't explicit, but you could kind of sense the feeling of diversity in that montage. And it kind of really made me feel good about the inclusiveness that we're trying to have as part of Blizzard and our community. In terms of kind of concrete things, well, first of all, everyone should go to the diversity meetup that's on the 2nd/3rd floor of the North Hall. So that's kind of a safe place for us to talk about these sorts of issues. But in terms of kind of concrete things, there's a couple things Blizzard is doing. And it kind of starts from the hiring process up to how we keep people. And so kind of on this end, One of the things we're doing is, with our intern program, we're trying to really focus on increasing how many female interns we get for our various positions. And so last year, we actually doubled the percentage of women that we're getting for these positions. And then kind of on the retention portion, I know that I believe next year, in 2018, there's going to be a Women at Blizzard Summit. And so this is, a place for people to talk about these sorts of things. And, obviously, this is a really important issue for us. But we can always do better. There's always more to be done. But, we're trying.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Hi, guys. Thanks. So network-wise, what are the top issues or challenges that you keep facing, but you haven't really been able to solve totally, network-wise?
I can talk a little to that. I mean, maybe this doesn't directly answer your question, but we get a lot of DDoSes.
Yeah.
And so we approach it on many different levels, all the way from our services being able to handle that sort of thing, up to our ISPs, and so that's a problem that continually plagues us a bit, and we're always playing this game with them in terms of we figure out new techniques, they figure out new techniques, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big problem for us.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. In mobile specifically, DDoS and network straining is an issue that we have to kind of handle up front because we are kind of at the mercy of app reviews. So if there is a problem that we can't actually fix it, sometimes it can be a couple of days, sometimes even up to a week. And so we have to kind of be really diligent about what we're going to need up front.
Thank you. Excellent question.
Hi, so my question's about your database architecture. If you could talk a little bit about, with your high level of data and high volume, are you very normalized? Do you denormalize for performance, cache things, and have you looked at sort of SQL versus traditional SQL versus NoSQL key value stores?
I'd love to take that one because that was when I was mentioning Heroes 2.0. One of the big things we had to do was we try to do best thing first. Try to design the data. Typically, at least on my team, we are SQL based. We try to normalize the data. We try to not repeat things and so on. But sometimes you reach a point where performance-wise, the right thing is flatten your data, denormalize it. There are teams that do end up using NoSQL solutions for my platform, the one that I work on. It's not appropriate for many of the cases we're using, but there are actually teams that are using NoSQL solutions like Couchbase and some of the other things like that throughout the company. So it's kind of a what fits what you want to do. In the case of e-commerce, where we're linking accounts and we're linking like what licenses you have and a lot of other things like that, that sort of structured data fits really well. But game teams I know have a lot of different solutions.
I mean, one of the great things about Blizzard is that each of the teams is given the freedom to implement whatever solution works best for them. And so, I mean, one of the things the game teams are really fortunate about is that we have this amazing platform that can support all these things, and we have experts in the field who can work with us to help us make these decisions in terms of what technology works best. So you'll find pretty much everything.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Hi. So I understand some of you have worked in other industries, and I'm interested in how you managed sort of side projects, which I'm sure you also work on, with your sort of full-time work schedule, and how do you, maintain sanity and time management while still being productive at work?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So before I actually was at Blizzard, I had a lot of side projects, and a lot of that actually led to me being a mobile developer, which was really fun. But I don't think I managed it too well in the beginning, and I really burnt myself out spending too many late nights and too many weekends. I think that the true balance comes when you just set aside some time for it, but you don't let it interfere with your daily job. And I think it's very good to try and have your main job be someplace that you're passionate about. That way, your side projects can help your learning, but you don't want to have something that's more interesting on the side that's going to take your focus. And so it's good to have balance. It's really good to have that extra side project learning. It helps you grow outside of what you're already doing at your work, but just not heavily diving into things too deep and really being avoiding of your burnout is a big thing.
One other thing, aside from just side projects, is it's also not a bad idea to get involved in some open source initiatives. And these are not your own projects, obviously, but there are ways to contribute to these things as well that maybe you can manage your time a little bit better.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that. It's really helpful just to check out the open source community. You don't have to contribute, but it's available for you to look at. It's really interesting to study what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how exactly they're doing it, and incorporate that into your own skill set.
My first job actually I got was contributing to an open source project. So like the fact that I would say put that on my resume really helped there. We also at Blizzard have hackathon for some of our teams where we dedicate time to, if you've got a project you've been working on, maybe this is something that can turn into something. I think, Ryan, like Battle.net app kind of sort of came out of that.
Yeah, there's some influence in a hackathon, definitely.
So I'll just add a little bit to that. On the Hearthstone team, we actually do a Free Your Mind at the very end of the year. So last couple of weeks of December, everybody on the team actually has a chance to work on projects that they're passionate about. Most of these projects are central to Hearthstone, but they don't have to be. What we found is that because of Hearthstone's kind of relentless schedule of expansions, which we love working on, it's very important that we don't crunch. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be able to maintain that practice. And at the end of the year, giving people a chance to express their own inner creativity, I think allows us to just explore and kind of use that time at the end of the year just to come back and feel, not only have I done all this great stuff for Hearthstone, but individually I'm able to learn and grow. So thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask, what does a normal work week look like for you guys at Blizzard?
I can start off. I mean, for me, because I'm a lead, I'm probably in a lot more meetings than I would like to be. But typically, at least at the lead level, a lot of these meetings are very important because you're making decisions about kind of the long-term future of the game and about our interactions with the other teams. So that takes up maybe like 50% of my week. And then a lot of my time is also spent making sure that the people on the server team, my team, are engaged and doing interesting work, and they're enjoying that. And then I probably spend like a couple hours a week coding, but that's about it at this point.
Yeah, I can add a little to that as well, since I'm sort of on the other end of that right now, where I'm an individual contributor on our team. So I have a lead, and he tries to keep me engaged with the good work. So a lot of my time is dedicated to just solving those problems that are sort of given to me and discovered as well. Obviously, we have the autonomy to be able to discover if something needs to be done and get that done. And you'll hear this a lot probably throughout all of this talk, but it's sort of different per game team. It depends how they decide it's best to manage their people and how they work best.
I also think it's important to say that we also spend a little time playing video games with our coworkers.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
That's what lunch is about.
Well, thank you.
Hi, I was wondering if Blizzard is more of a DevOps operation or whether there's a more rigid separation between developers and operations.
It's a great question.
On Battle.net, for example, we have DevOps embedded with a lot of our teams. Operationalizing our platform is the key to how we are continuously striving to keep our systems up. How do we keep them up? How do we keep them fast? And if it's something where you just toss it over the wall, it's never going to work, right? So We actually have them embedded with the team. We actually have a lot of our team, QAs embedded, DevOps embedded, system reliability engineers. So when we're going and pushing something new, it's get all of those people involved as early as possible so we can do the right rollout solution. Is it something that we can auto scale, or is it something we can't? Is it something, how do we push it live? So right there from the start.
Yeah, I have some pretty strong feelings about this whole topic because a previous company I worked at had a strategy that I don't necessarily agree with. I think it's really, really important, like Andrew mentioned, to not throw things over the fence. And the common phrase is, eat your own dog food as well. Is we need to make sure that we are experiencing the same problems that everyone else is experiencing, and then. And so for us, for Team 5, we don't actually, the Hearthstone team, we don't actually have a DevOps team per se. There is a LiveOps team, but everyone on the team is responsible for what happens with everything. And that's really important to us.
Yeah, I want to second that as well. It's the same on the Diablo team. It's very important. You're not just pushing a game out for people to enjoy and then just sort of forgetting and moving on to something else. That game is living and breathing, and it's everyone's job, gladly, to keep it running as best as it can. And everyone pulls their own weight on that.
Well, thank you. Next question.
Hello. I would like to know what sort of freedom do you have to choose programming languages to solve the different challenges that you face in your day-to-day work or to develop new products? Are you restrained by the platforms that you run on, or is there some ability to innovate there?
Yeah. I can start on that. I feel that we have a lot of freedom to do some exploration on what's the best. I know with the mobile team, especially now, the platforms are changing very rapidly, so we're always looking for what is the next best thing, whether it's the best language, with iOS, it's like Swift is the best native language moving forward, or if there's any way that we can share code between the different platforms. And a lot of times people actually do their own research and bring their case for whether or not this is going to be something that we should be using as a team, and we decide on that as a team.
The other thing is oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add that we try to strike a balance. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense for things to be more consistent and for it to be more standardized, but then sometimes it's also important to also look into the future and what else is out there.
We also probably use pretty much any programming language or stack you can think of. We have literally everything. It may be a particular team. This is our framework. This is what we do because if you have a one-off that doesn't work well, but we have C#, Java, C++, Swift, Node. Like we have everything, and use the right tool for the right job.
Well, thank you.
So I was just kind of curious, what do you guys do to continue to hone in your skills? Because I've recently graduated and just kind of want to know, what do you do after? What to do?
I can start with that. So I think one of the most important things is to do stuff, whatever that stuff is, like we talked earlier about projects or open source initiatives, and complete them. Because during the process of completion, you're going to learn that there are sacrifices to be made and compromises to be made. And once you learn those sorts of decision-making skills, those are really, really valuable. And then the second thing is just understand the technologies, right? So we've been listing off a whole bunch of different technologies that we use. And the more familiarity you have with them, the better.
I would prefer to see, as a hiring manager, I'd prefer to see one language really well or one skill really well than to know a plethora of languages all very, superficially. So I think I would add that.
I like to follow popular blogs and news channels for the technologies I'm trying to learn. And it's also really common for conferences to publish their talks online, and it's you have to look and dig a little bit, but there's lots of free content out there. And another thing that's really helpful is you have to really geek out about the stuff you're learning. Like if you can figure out, if you're not geeking out while you're learning it, you need to take a step back and just figure out what about that technology makes you enjoy it, and then go from there.
Don't be afraid to try something new. Like, learn it and make a ton of mistakes, but learn that at home and make a ton of mistakes. You know, at work, already have an idea of like, hey, you know, we can maybe use this, but at home, I mean, I have so many projects where it's like, man, I made a mess of this, but I learned something out of it. So just keep trying new things.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Justin. I've been working as a dev for like about 5 years now, and one thing that I've just started to learn coming out of college is like dealing with legacy systems is always really fun, interesting. I'm sure you guys have a lot of experience with that. Some of your games are like a decade old, which is really impressive. And so one thing that I was wondering is, what are some of the legacy systems that you've worked with that you found really interesting? Or like, what's like your favorite inline comment that you saw that's just been there forever and you're just like, yeah, that's a good one?
Code archaeology.
Yeah. I have something on this. When I was first hired, I worked on BattleNet, and at the time, we did a weekly rotation for people to handle sort of those legacy issues, tickets that would come in for those legacy systems, which by this point, I think there was one person who knew how it all worked. Probably not that bad, but it felt that way anyway. So part of this was to rotate everyone through so we could spread this knowledge around and everyone could know. So I had to work on a ticket for Diablo 2, which meant that I had to go into the Diablo 2 server code, which I was not familiar with at all, and it was very enlightening to go back through that code. The particular issue was some people would log in and it would say they were banned and they were not banned, and so they were like, you know, what's going on? And going through it, we eventually figured out we were trying to, by this point in time, we had made more registration keys, CD keys for the game, such that there were more bits associated with that CD key than the code was assuming. And so it was trying to shove in a higher precision value into, you know, it was trying to shove 64 into 32, essentially. And so you'd get those lower 32 and it'd be like, oh, this guy's banned because his lower 32 bits match this other random guy that got banned somewhere else. So it was really fun. It was fun digging through that old code and figuring those kinds of issues out.
Way back when, before Hearthstone was actually integrated into BattleNet, our previous tech director, his name was Bob, created kind of a pseudo BattleNet type system for Hearthstone to be able to work, and he called it BobNet. And so all over the code, there are comments about BobNet. And like nowadays, no one knows what that is, but that's from many, many years ago.
Well, thank you.
Hi. I was wondering if you guys work closely with data scientists or analysts, and how much data analytics do you guys use?
We use a ton. So our BI guys, first of all, they're amazing. And they do all these cool graphs. I don't know data science very well, so I'm just going to use layman's terms, but graphs. Cool graphs that tell us things like, we have like a meta report that tells us in Hearthstone, you know, what sorts of cards are popular, what sorts of cards are doing well, the correlation between two different cards and stuff like that. So, I mean, the amount of data that we consume is just phenomenal, and you know, the pipes that this data comes through are very, very large, but there's some really amazing stuff that comes out of that.
Yeah, for mobile is my familiarity, and we have to put a lot of analytics in our applications because we need to know how people are using the app. It's really important to understand how they're using the app and what they may or may not be doing a lot, because you usually only hear from like the crashes or the big asks, but we just want to know from like the common user who may not actually directly contact us. And so analytics are a big part of it, and we have some very smart people analyzing that and setting up how it's going to be put in place.
From a mathematical standpoint, what I really enjoy working with our BI team with is on the matchmaking for Hearthstone, and that's where I think the rubber meets the road. because they actually look at all the numbers, they do the analysis, and then they say, okay, in order to adjust our matchmaking so that we have the nice, perfectly formed curve that we want, these are the numbers that you need to put into the system. So as a software engineer, you understand how to craft code, but the more higher mathematical understanding of what's going on in the meta, it's very important that we have them to help us do our jobs. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. I had a question. So I was wondering, in terms of career as an engineer with Blizzard, I was wondering, when I go on the job site month after month, I see so many senior software engineering positions, but not as many entry-level kind of positions. And I was just wondering what recommendations you'd give for someone who's 2 years out of a Bachelor's of Science program in mechanical and software engineering, with some work experience using AutoCAD, education or experience using C++ and Java. I'm just wondering, what recommendations you would have in terms of, being able to start as a software engineer, for instance, with Blizzard, because I've noticed that, at least from my observations and speaking with people, it seems like either people, starting QA and then they upgrade to a position, or they go to a super specialized, college of gaming design or something, or gaming engineering, or they just have worked for years and years as an engineer in a different company or bigger companies, and they come to Blizzard. And I was just wondering, if you guys could maybe talk a little about, how you became engineers at Blizzard, and also if you know, or any of you, or know other people in your department that came in as, more recent college grads, and kind of how they make that transition and get a career with Blizzard, because it just, to me, it seems like kind of a mystery. And I'm so happy you guys come here today to this panel too, because all previous years I've never seen this before, so I really appreciate your input.
I do want to say something up top about this, which may not directly answer your question, but I do want to get it out there, which is always apply. Like, I can speak to so many times before I got at my job here where I psyched myself out, like seeing what the positions were, just seeing, oh, this is Blizzard, I'll never get in. Oh, this position requires too much experience, or I don't necessarily have XYZ skill, so I shouldn't even bother applying. I cannot stress enough, always, always, always apply. It's their problem to figure out if you have what they're looking for. But if you don't, it's that old saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And so, there's more to it than that, but at a base level, I cannot stress enough, just put your name in the hat, apply, just apply.
My team's actually hiring level people. We're always looking for smart people. If we put a framework out there, or something like, we want someone to be familiar with such and such, that's something we prefer. That's something we're using. That's something where if you know it off the bat, that's extra. But really, we want smart people, people who aren't afraid of challenges, people that aren't coming in with, no, we're going to do this way. There's a lot of times reasons why things are done a certain way. So having an open mind and kind of having a tool chest to sort of go, I'm good, I'm solid at programming. Maybe I'm not solid in Java, maybe I'm solid in C#. Could you learn it? I'm sure you could if you're smart at that. So apply anyways. We've had multiple people where we've hired on my team that didn't use Java, but that's our main platform. They picked it up and, they're pumping out solid work regularly. So yeah, apply. Like, absolutely apply. There are a ton of entry-level positions, and if you're in school, please check out the internship program. We've had some of our, brightest people that are moving up in the company come from the engineering team. Hearthstone's had people, we have someone who came through our engineering program who is on my team who's doing great, so apply.
I don't think it's important that you go to a game development school if you want to get into Blizzard. I think what's important is that whatever school you go to, that you get the most out of that experience as you possibly can, which starts with you. So I went to public higher education. I didn't benefit from going to an Ivy League or anything, and I'm sitting here on this stage with my esteemed colleagues, and I'd like to think that everyone here can do that. And actually, there are a fair number of people who didn't even go to college. They came right out of high school. They're very smart. They're very passionate. So I think passion and determination is a very important attitude to have. And ultimately, that will carry you very far in life, not just here at Blizzard. And also, I think you should write a good cover letter, because I know at least one of the guys here reads them.
Yeah.
Well, at least two.
Because this is an important topic I want to add too, I think it's really important to have something to show. I mean, whether that is a side project or something that you're passionate about, something that you can kind of showcase that you've been a part of in the past. And also, there is a lot of hope. I mean, Blizzard hires a lot of new grads. And so it's not just a bunch of seniors, engineers. And so, yeah, there's a lot of hope. And then we have a big internship program, as was stated, and new grads get hired often.
Well, thank you for that great question.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Ryan. It's difficult to account for everything in a plan, and certainly requirements change. But do you have any techniques or methodologies used to prevent rework, particularly when coordinating with other teams?
Loud voices. Actually, I'll answer that seriously. I mean, so I like to say sometimes that there needs to be a healthy conflict between different disciplines. And maybe conflict is too strong of a word, but ultimately, you have to understand that everyone wants the same long-term goal. So for myself, for example, for my team, everyone on the Hearthstone team wants Hearthstone to be successful. But different teams will have different views of how to accomplish that. And so, for example, when I'm in a meeting with production and design and art and so on, we're all going to have our own views of what is the most important thing in order for Hearthstone to continue to be successful. And no one person is right or wrong. It's just different perspectives. And so at that point, it's a matter of learning to negotiate and compromise. And so for myself, oftentimes I'm in those meetings saying, well, wait, we don't want to do that because our system is not going to be able to scale, or it's too late in the development cycle and you add too much risk. But other people are going to say other things. And eventually, you hope to be able to come to some sort of consensus and do what's right for the game.
Oh, thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for taking our questions. And I'm somebody who works in software right now. I'm looking to transition into hardware. And something that interests me was server architecture and how the hardware behind all of the software operates and works with software. And when you brought up the DDoS question, that got me, or DDoS answer, that got me thinking about how you handle the sheer amount of traffic coming in and out, and what sort of hardware and software solutions you have to mitigate, DDoS attacks or any other sort of high volume traffic, basically.
So when I'm hiring for the server team, there's a couple of things I'm looking for that's outside of maybe some of the other engineering disciplines. One of them is you always need to be thinking about scalability. So if that is not forefront on your mind, then maybe a different discipline is more appropriate for you. But scalability is always going to be a super important thing for us. And then the second part of it is, oftentimes when we get software engineering applications, most of the time they're for gameplay. And for obvious reasons, like I said earlier, there's this kind of visceral feel-good moment when you see gameplay stuff work. But when I'm interviewing for server people, one of the things I look for is, do you get joy out of seeing a well-running system? And I do. And I want to look for other people that get that same joy. Wow, all these servers are running. We've got X number of people logging in at the same time, and it's all going smoothly. Like, to me, that's really exciting, and I'm looking for people who find that exciting as well. So I think that those are a couple of really important aspects, at least for me.
Yeah, I would like to also add, it's important when you're designing your software and your architecture to horizontally scale as much as you can. And also, it's really important to know how to monitor the pieces that you're responsible for, so that if there is something like a BlizzCon, there's high-load events coming in, that you can monitor it well and see where the bottlenecks are and address them by adding hardware and configuring accordingly.
Data segregation is another important thing. How do you don't want, if one team is having, maybe a large event, you don't want to cause an outage on another team. So you want to be able to architect your application in a way where when it's appropriate, you can segregate data. It could be maybe something stored in a different place. It could be you have a separate pool of servers. If you're going to build your application that way, the last thing you want is to have an application that requires just bigger and bigger and bigger servers. So you're going to run into problems with that. So the best thing to do is write code that is going to scale horizontally and not cost a ton to do it. And then when you do, keep growing, how do you deal with the fact that you're going to end up with bottleneck somewhere? So how do you deal with that bottleneck in a way that's not going to require something to be completely rewritten? So, yeah.
Yeah, something else to add to that, on top of, part and parcel with horizontal scalability is having good fault tolerance with your horizontal scalability, because, if your system is set up such that when one server goes down, it kicks off 20,000 people or something like that, that's maybe not as ideal as what you would hope for. Other than maybe when it crashes or shuts down or anything else, other things just sort of take up the responsibility, maybe something like that.
Actually, there's one other thing that I thought of, is graceful degradation of services. So, for example, if some part of the game has a problem, the ability to shut that part of the game off, but allow people to still enjoy the rest of the game is really important as well, right? You don't want to kick everyone off just because there's some small portion of your system that isn't working correctly.
So it's a great view of what we're doing internally to be able to address those issues. But I think we'd be a bit remiss if we didn't acknowledge that we have some great partners that we work with outside of Blizzard, from our data provider, our internet providers, and other companies that manage the traffic of the internet. And we actually work with them when we're having problems. It's as if somebody comes in banging on your door, and they're trying to get in. What do? Well, you hopefully will call the police because they can, help you from the other side. So we do partner with those companies. So we do our part, and we ask them to do their part. And I think that's how we've been able to manage these issues in the past. Thank you.
I was wondering what advice you would have for a high school student who wanted to pursue a career in coding?
So first of all, I'm going to mention this for obvious reasons. There's a summer camp called Girls Do Code, and that is actually something that Blizzard is involved in as well. I think we've been seeing a lot of good success coming out of that. In general, I think it's really important to find out what you're passionate about. So, obviously, software engineering is kind of a very broad topic. So it's important to try a lot of different things and see what speaks to you. I think that's going to be one of the more important things to do, at least at this point.
Are you taking any CS classes or anything like that?
I was thinking about it, but not at the moment, no.
If you can, enroll in CS. If you can't do that, check out Khan Academy. Check out anything. Just try and just start writing code for things. It doesn't need to be perfect. Early in my career, I spent a ton of time just trying to make the perfect thing. You end up with one beautiful file that does almost nothing. So when you're starting out, just try and write lots of little things. You'll learn to get better at it over time, but just write basic things. One of the things I find is try to do something visual where you can get rapid iteration. Your first programming, a lot of times you're writing a basic loop that spits out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Figure out maybe there's a way you could move that onto the screen. Maybe you could have it spit out something on a web page. Maybe you can have it do something that's going to continuously keep your interest to where something you thought you were going to spend an hour on, you spent a whole evening on. Just make sure to do your homework and stuff like that, too.
I think being here in a community that we have here is also a big help, because people here, I think, will support you in your goals and your desires to learn how to code and maybe make games or maybe do something else. But there are a lot of people, a lot of diverse experiences here, and I think you should reach out to them, ask them if they're coders. I think if you see any of us around on the show floor, go ahead, stop us, ask us how we got into it. But I think it's ultimately, as we've said, do your homework, your studies, take classes, go on the internet, a lot of resources. I think there's a lot out there to help you. Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering, how does Blizzard engage with or contribute to the world outside of video games? setting industry standards or engaging with academics even, for example?
I can mention a little about that. Just I haven't myself done this, but I know a number of engineers at our company are contributing to, have made proposals and such to the C++ standard. It's escaping me which explicit ones they've done. I think modules might have been one, but I'm sorry that I don't have more detail on it. But I know there are a number of engineers who are heavily involved with contributing to C++. Premake is another one. That's a very good point. Premake, there's heavy contribution to that project.
RabbitMQ, SumSpring. I think Web and Mobile actually recently had some contributions. I can't. Like there's people that do things all the time on that. Qt is another one that I know we've contributed patches upstream to. Like there's open source. There's GDC. There's always GDC. Before I got to Blizzard, I loved just going and finding out like what was on GDC. Like what are some of the really cool presentations. Like I love the GDC talk for StarCraft 2 for how screen space ambient occlusion was being done. Like that's one of my favorite papers when I first was trying to get excited about the game industry, to just sort of read how that stuff. So there's a ton of things out there. Just got to kind of take a look for it.
All right, thank you very much. So I think we'll have time for maybe one, maybe two quick questions.
Hi, I'm MVP of your Blizzard Web API forum, and I was wondering how you guys think about enabling third-party developers to build awesome tools around the game.
So one of the initiatives that we have actually is game data. So I believe there's some data that we publish there for consumption by third parties. I'm not that familiar with other things.
Dev.battle.net is where the game data API is. We're always striving to try and put out more and more stuff. There's nothing really that we have to really talk about now, but like it's a thing that we're constantly like, hey, how can we expose this to people who want to build things on our platform?
Oh, thank you. I think we do have time for more questions.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Joseph Ogor, and I'm a graduate student currently in like data engineering, and I was wondering, we use data to build models to predict the future. So I was wondering if there are any teams on the engineering team that kind of use like you said, the data analysts provide you all this information to somehow predict how like new cards and new characters will influence the game, and kind of to try to keep the game balanced. Because I know when Pirate Warrior came out in Hearthstone, I was like, why are there so many Pirate Warriors on the ladder? And to just try to minimize and the balance and maximize the balance that's happening across the game. I was wondering if you guys utilize any of the data to build those types of models, maybe validate with simulation or anything like that.
I think, well, so first of all, this is probably a question that's better asked for designers, because ultimately they're the ones that consume a lot of the analysis that BI does in order to decide what to do next. In terms of the Pirate Warrior specific part of the question, there were a lot of them, but I don't think they were doing so well compared to everything else that they were necessarily a problem. And I mean, this is less of an engineering question, but there's a world for kind of relatively cheap decks that people can play, and Pirate Warrior kind of fit the bill for that.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're about out of time, so I just want to thank everyone here in the room and also on the virtual ticket for joining us. I can say for myself, I think as also for the gentleman here, is that what makes all this worth it for me is all of you. So thanks for coming again, and we'll see you hopefully tonight at the concert, and enjoy the show.